They shoved her off the cliff and burst out laughing as her body vanished beyond the edge. No scream followed, no struggle echoed, just the scrape of boots scattering gravel into silence. They figured that was the end. No rope, no backup, no chance, only a sheer drop deep enough to erase both a body and a witness. What they didn't realize was that seals don't need ropes to climb because she never truly fell. Bleeding, shattered, and furious, she clawed her way back up the same cliff meant to bury her, carrying a blade and a mission to turn their whole operation into ashes. Before we show you how Lieutenant Commander Avery Holt turned a mountain into a battlefield, make sure you're subscribed to Major Tom's Tales with the bell icon on, and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Because this isn't a story about falling, it's about the kind of will that rises anyway. The mountain didn't echo when it happened. It just went still. One heartbeat, gone. Lieutenant Commander Avery Holt had been stepping cautiously along a narrow ridge, her boot digging into worn shale, eyes scanning for altitude markers. Then, suddenly, she was weightless. She sensed it an instant before, the shift in air, the quiet from the 3 contractors behind her. Not the calm of focus, but the tense stillness that always comes before violence. She'd only begun to turn when their hands struck her back. No words, no warning, just the rush of cold wind and the sickening drop as gravity ripped her center away. She didn't scream, not because fear wasn't there, but because instinct screamed louder. Her fingers clawed for anything, root, rock, miracle, and found a jagged outcrop no wider than her forearm. Her shoulder hit first, then her knee, then her hip, and finally, merciful stillness. She sprawled across the ledge, chest heaving, blood trickling warm beneath her temple. Her left boot dangled over the edge, nothing but open air below. From above, muffled voices floated down, amused, cocky. "Well, hell, that went cleaner than I figured." "Think she's gone?" one asked. "She will be. No one climbs back from that without a rope." Laughter followed, boots scraping against loose stone. A cough. Then silence. Avery blinked toward the fading sky, blood smearing across her lashes. The light was already dying. Dusk in the Altera Highlands came fast and cold, and she knew the temperature would drop with it. Her mind pushed through the fog of pain and betrayal. They shoved me, not symbolically, not politically, physically shoved. The 3 men she'd worked beside for nearly a week, private contractors supposedly assisting NATO drills along the Altera corridor, had just tried to kill her. Not a mistake, not panic, premeditated. She tasted dirt as she shifted, a crack echoing from deep within her ribs. The ledge beneath her was no more than a slab of slanted granite. Below, a sheer fall, maybe 150 feet, plunged into tree-choked darkness. One wrong move, one breath too heavy, and she'd be gone. But panic never came. Instead, a cold, sharp calm slid into her veins. She ran a trembling hand down her vest, assessing. A cracked carabiner, one broken strap, but the rig held, a half coil of rope still hooked to her hip. Her pistol was gone, lost to the ravine, but the knife strapped to her calf remained. Alive, wounded, still alive. And that was bad news for the men above because they figured she'd die quietly. They thought a fall could erase a seal, but they had no idea what kind of woman Avery Holt really was, or what she'd been trained to do when even gravity turned traitor. She drew herself inward, every movement deliberate, refusing to shift her weight off the ledge. Then, through cracked teeth and fire-laced breath, she whispered to the rock beneath her, "They're gonna wish I didn't make it." And bleeding, she began to climb. Pain wasn't abstract anymore. It had a pulse. It hammered behind her right eye, thumped in her ribs like a second heartbeat, burned down her left thigh where jagged stone had sliced through her combat pants. But Avery had been broken before. She'd been dropped from helicopters. Too low to jump. Too hot to hover. She'd been waterboarded until her own name vanished in the haze. She'd been pushed through drills designed to break soldiers in under an hour. Pain didn't stop her. It reminded her she was still fighting. She lifted her gaze. The cliff towered above her, a wall of scorched earth rising 20 feet to the ridge. She could see the spot where she'd been shoved. A fractured section of trail, gravel still sliding loose in the chill wind. The mercenaries hadn't even looked to confirm the kill, assuming the fall had done their work. But Avery wasn't finished, not even close. She tested each limb, right arm functional, shoulder screaming, but mobile. Left leg, bad, torn muscle, maybe partial tear, didn't matter. She could move it. She would move it. She pressed her boots into the cliff, back scraping against rough stone, fingers searching for purchase. The climb was brutal, clumsy, raw, but possible. Then she caught sight of something faint just above her reach. A rusted bolt, half buried in the rock, coated in red dust. Old military hardware. A training anchor, the mountain remembered. Decades earlier, this same route had probably been part of an old SEAL mountaineering drill, back in the Cold War days when U.S. teams trained elite climbers to cross European ridges at recon speed. Most of those bolts were forgotten relics now, except by those who studied the old manuals. Avery had. Hell, she'd rewritten them. She unclipped her utility belt, looping it around her waist and threading one arm through like a makeshift Swiss seat. A short coil of cord still hung from the gear hook on her back, standard issue. Most would have used it to rappel down. She planned to climb up. Blood traced a line down her cheek as she planted her first boot into a groove no wider than her fingers. Her foot slipped. She caught herself with a sharp gasp, wedging her hand into a narrow crack until the stone bit into her skin. "Not today," she whispered to the mountain. "Not like this." Every inch upward felt like a negotiation with pain. Every grip tested. Every pull strained something that begged her to stop, but she didn't. Because years ago in Coronado, during her second week of Bud S., an instructor had sliced her rope mid-climb and shouted down, "A SEAL climbs with or without a rope, Holt. What are you, equipment or operator?" She hadn't answered then. She didn't need to now. She just climbed. The rock didn't care that she was bleeding, or that betrayal still echoed in her chest, or that every reach tore at her ribs while her leg trembled from blood loss. The mountain didn't care. It never does. The mountain waited, as if daring her to fall next. Avery Holt wasn't in the mood to volunteer. Her boot scraped hard against the granite as she pulled herself higher, muscles shaking with defiance. Her fingers groped for cracks, edges, any hold that could bear her weight. She climbed slowly, not from fear, but precision. One bad grip, and gravity would take her again. She paused on a narrow ledge, barely wider than a rifle stock, pressing her hip against the wall to ease her wounded leg. Her breath came in short, deliberate bursts, tight but steady. Her hands were torn open in 3 spots, dirt and blood painting her knuckles, streaking together with the mountain dust. Still, she climbed. In that stillness, she heard her father's voice, not from Coronado, but from Colorado, years ago. He'd taken her up the San Juan Range when she was 13, her first real mountain. No ropes, no guides, just her dad, and what they carried on their backs. She'd slipped near the top, hit ice, froze, told him she couldn't go on. He hadn't yelled or reached for her. He'd just said, "Cliffs aren't walls, Avery. They're tests, and they only stop the ones who stop themselves." Back then, she'd thought it was just something a dad said to keep a scared kid moving. Now, she understood. She shoved off the ledge and climbed again. This wasn't escape anymore. It was taking back what they'd tried to steal. Those mercenaries hadn't just tried to kill her. They'd taken her control, tossed her aside like expendable gear. That ended now, 30 feet, 20, 10. She could smell pine in the wind, resin thick in the air. The ridge was close. Her final pull nearly sent her slipping backward. Her boot gave way, and for a heartbeat she dangled sideways, one hand locked around a chipped bolt. She screamed, not in fear but rage, and hurled her other hand upward. Fingers met dirt, gravel, grass, the edge. She dragged herself over the edge like a ghost clawing its way out of the underworld. Then, silence. Avery Holt lay flat on the ridge, chest heaving against the dirt, cheek pressed into the cold ground. Stars blinked into focus above her, but celebration wasn't an option. Roughly 100 yards ahead, faint orange light flickered beyond a line of trees. Voices carried through the wind. Laughter. She rolled to her side and crawled toward a shallow rise. Peering through the brush, she saw it. A full-scale field camp. Crates stacked high, radios chattering, rifles leaned against tents. No NATO oversight, no discipline, no training exercise. This wasn't a drill, it was a disguise. Arms, ammo, trafficking routes masked as humanitarian aid. And her access to intel had made her a liability. They hadn't pushed her to make her vanish. They'd pushed her to erase what she'd discovered. But they failed. Avery Holt was back on the ridge, and this time she held the high ground. She moved like vengeance given form, low and deliberate, circling wide around the mercenaries' camp. The terrain and the night became her armor. Every motion had purpose. Slow where patience served her, fast where instinct demanded. Her SEAL conditioning wasn't training anymore, it was instinct. You don't outrun enemies like these, you outthink them. She stopped near a moss-lined boulder and listened. Nothing from the outpost team, probably still drunk. "Doesn't matter," one voice muttered. "Load the rest before dawn. Convoy hits the checkpoint at 0600. They weren't cautious. Why would they be? As far as they knew, she was dead, cooling somewhere on the cliffside. Whatever tension still lingered among them hadn't matured into fear. She peered through the branches. 6 men in sight, 2 pacing the perimeter lazily, 1 smoking. Stacks of crates sat marked with spray-painted emblems: medical relief, winter rations, water purification. But she recognized those designs. Military weapons, crates under fake stencils, a classic black market disguise. She counted 3 being loaded onto a battered military transport, its tailgate sagging under the weight. Beside it, 2 duffel bags lay open, rifles glinting beneath a tarp. The operation ran deeper than she'd imagined, and far wider. They didn't shove me because they hated me, Avery Holt thought grimly. They shoved me because I saw this. She pulled back behind the mossy boulder, slowing her breath until her heartbeat matched the wind. Her earpiece crackled with faint static. She'd almost forgotten the shortwave mic still clipped to her collar. The range was short, but maybe she could catch their internal chatter. "Confirmed," a voice said through the interference. She went over. No body, but no movement since. That's a coffin drop. She'll be bones by morning. Avery's jaw tightened. She could hear the smugness dripping from the voice. No confirmation needed when gravity did the work. That was their method. Efficient, detached, surgical in the ugliest sense. Men like that didn't leave witnesses, just empty space. Creeping forward, she avoided a patch of brittle pine needles and watched one merc unzip a field satchel. Inside, maps, not just local routes but full NATO corridor schedules, transit logs, encryption keys, high-level material. Then her stomach turned cold. A photo was clipped to the inside flap. A surveillance shot taken 3 days ago outside the NATO logistics tent. Of her. Someone had been tracking Avery Holt long before this mission began. The shove hadn't been panic. It was the plan. They'd joined her unit for one purpose: get her alone, make her vanish somewhere no one would look. She'd known there were whispers about corruption in the Altera corridor, but not like this. Now she understood. Her death wasn't cleanup. It was protection. It would have sealed the entire conspiracy before it surfaced. That made her a threat, and they had no idea the mistake they'd made. Avery shifted deeper into the shadows, circling the camp again. She noted every flaw. The lazy rotations, unsecured fuel drums, munitions stacked too close to tents. They thought they owned the night. They were wrong. They had no clue the woman they'd tried to bury was already scheming to tear their whole network apart, and she meant to start tonight. They'd made 3 mistakes. First, they assumed the mountain had finished her. Second, they trusted they could sleep with no perimeter. Third, they hauled too much fuel. Avery waited until the camp quieted. Midnight in the highlands brought wind that sliced through the pines and a cold that made even the most wired mercs pull blankets tighter and sip canned coffee. She used that to her advantage. Crawling down the slope, she slipped through the tree line behind the supply tent. No movement, no sentry. Perfect. The fuel drums sat in sloppy stacks near the tent's rear flap. Military-grade plastic, triple-sealed, but packed close enough that one spark could chain them like falling dominoes. She didn't need an inferno, just a message. From her thigh pouch, she pulled a thin strip of detonation cord. Waterproof, quiet. She ran it between the drums, looped it over a support stake, and seated a friction primer. Then she melted back into shadow to the far side of the camp. Silence, discipline, perfect. Breath even, heart steady. Her first target slept by the truck, AK across his chest, boots kicked off, socks tucked into webbing. Avery moved like dust, one arm around his throat, the other over his mouth. The scuffle lasted less than 6 seconds. She dragged him behind the truck, checked for movement. None. They still thought they were alone. She stripped his comms radio and ammo belt. Didn't need his rifle. Her knife was faster in that terrain. In the tent closest to the fire, 2 men played cards under a red lamplight. "Think we'll get extra for the crates we snagged off that Slovak depot?" one muttered. "Nah, this op's already over budget," the other said. "Once we dump the cargo across the border, we're ghosts." That was the last line Avery Holt caught before slipping away toward the ridge, where the firelight thinned and the dark swallowed sound. At the top, she stopped, pulled out the lighter sealed inside her vest, sparked the primer, and vanished into the shadows. The blast that followed wasn't massive, but it didn't have to be. It cracked sharp and clean through the night, just loud enough to wake the camp, but tight enough to avoid collateral. One fuel drum erupted. Fire licked along the tent's edge. Then came the screams. Gunfire followed, chaotic, blind. Shouts tangled through the smoke. "She's alive!" someone yelled. "No chance, no one climbs out of that fall." Then who the hell did this? Avery crouched low beneath the ridge, watching panic take hold. Fear unraveled them faster than bullets ever could. They hadn't buried her. They'd resurrected her. And now they'd live haunted by what they'd created. Fear, when used right, was louder than gunfire. She crouched inside the tree line, her uniform caked in mud, blood, and smoke. The flames she'd started were already dimming, but they'd done their real job. They'd lit a fuse called paranoia. Across the camp, voices cracked through radio static. "She's alive! We saw her go over!" "Well, you didn't hear her scream, did you?" Silence fell hard after that. Avery thumbed on the radio she'd taken, tuning it to their command frequency, the same encryption pattern she'd broken months ago during a recon sweep. These men weren't professionals. They were arrogant, careless with their signals. Her voice came through the open channel, low and distorted. "You should have checked the ledge." That was all she said before cutting transmission. Inside the tent near the smoldering drums, two mercs froze mid-sentence. "Did you hear that?" one whispered. The other nodded, color draining from his face. That was her. "She's talking to us?" Avery Holt smiled through cracked lips. Talking was only the start. She spent the next 20 minutes crafting her next move. Using what was left of her climbing cord, she set 2 pressure snares along the slope just beyond the loading zone. Simple field traps, crude but reliable when placed on predictable paths. Then she took a calculated risk. Slipping close to the gear trailer, she sliced one of the truck's cargo straps, looped it into a noose, and tied it to a low-hanging branch above the cliff where she'd nearly died. Poetic symmetry. If anyone chased her down that route, they wouldn't be coming back. She left a single boot print in the dirt, pointing that way. Too clear, almost deliberate. She knew they'd bite. These men weren't strategists. They were predators. They believed in brute force, not patience. And now fear was making them predictable. Across the camp, a voice barked orders through static. "Regroup. Reset the patrols. She's hurt. She won't make it till morning." But even his voice trembled. They were trying to convince themselves. Then came a scream, not hers. One of them had tripped a snare. The rope coiled tight around his ankle, yanking him upward against a trunk. A sickening crack. Then a gunshot. One of his own putting him down. Too late. Panic was already spreading like wildfire. Another merc caught movement in the trees and emptied half a magazine into shadows. "Where is she?" "She's everywhere." "She's in the trees." No, she was just one woman. But to them, she'd already become something else. Avery keyed the stolen radio one last time. Her voice was a whisper sharpened into steel. "You didn't kill a seal. You unleashed her." Then she clicked off the line. She wasn't finished. Avery crept back toward the camp's eastern edge where the communications tent sat apart from the cluster. 2 guards posted there faced inward now, watching the chaos at the center instead of the dark behind them. Rookie mistake. She slipped through the tree line to the tent's rear, used her knife to slice a vertical slit in the canvas, and slipped inside. The radio setup was heavier than she'd expected. Encrypted satellite uplink, frequency-hopping channels. Somebody had money behind this opus. She pulled a small signal interceptor from her vest, the device she'd carried since the Sarajevo briefing. 30 seconds to clone their encryption, 20 more to blast the data to her secure channel. If she died on this ridge, at least their entire comms net wouldn't. Boots approached outside. She didn't rush, just pocketed the device, exited through the same slit, and vanished into the dark before the guards even turned. When they realized, it would be too late. Every transmission from the last week was already in naval hands. By dawn, pale blue washed the ridgeline and the camp had unraveled. Gear lay scattered. Half the men were gone, dead, snared, or missing. The rest huddled by the fire, rifles clutched, eyes flicking to every tree and whisper of wind. In the middle of it all, barking orders like a wolf with pups, was Major Drax. Avery recognized the type, scarred, barrel-chested, an old-school merc with too many tours and too many uniforms, probably ex-Foreign Legion or South African Recon. A man who mistook brutality for discipline, who believed fear could replace strategy. And now that fear was eating him. He stood by the central crate, gripping a suppressed pistol and snarling into a radio no one answered. "She's bluffing. She's hurt. We own this ridge." No one replied. Not his men, not his clients, not the night's ghosts. Avery stepped into the clearing without a sound. They didn't see her until she moved. Blood-soaked, silent, rifle slung from her shoulder, knife in her hand. Drax blinked, raised his pistol. She didn't flinch. "You can't kill us all, Holt," he growled. She didn't smile. She just kept walking. Within 10 feet, she let the rifle fall to the dirt, the metallic clatter final and clean. "Let's finish it," she said. He nodded. The mercs didn't intervene. They just stepped back, as if even they sensed something sacred had begun. Major Drax lunged first, surprisingly quick for a man his size. A military knife flashed toward her ribs. She spun beneath it, trapped his wrist, and drove her knee into his gut. He grunted, staggered, came again. This time he connected with her shoulder. Blunt force, no blood, but she absorbed it, dropped low, and rammed her forearm into his throat. They grappled. He had 40 pounds on her, but she had speed. Her strikes were precise, honed by years of kill-house work and silent kill drills. He fought like a brawler. She moved like a blade. They skid across ash and dirt, bodies crashing into crates and tent poles. He seized her vest strap, tried to throw her down. She rolled with it, used his momentum, and suddenly they were both near the very ridge he'd shoved her from the night before, only now he teetered on the edge. Her blade rested at his throat. He froze. Avery didn't push. She stared until she could see the fractures. He panted, blood at his lips. "Who hired you?" she asked. He hesitated, then barked a bitter, bleeding laugh. "What does it matter? They'll just send someone else." "No," she said. "They won't. Not after what I send back." She grabbed the rope from his pack, his own climbing kit, and bound his wrists and ankles tight, brutal knots the way he'd once taught rookies to escape from. Laughter died from his face. "Make sure your clients know," she said as she dragged him from the lip. "When you push a seal off a cliff, make damn sure they don't climb back up." She fired a flare. It hissed into the morning air like a warning. Red smoke trailed up through the alpine sky, visible for miles. Enough to snag the attention of the NATO patrol she'd seen on her satellite feed 2 days earlier. If they were on schedule, they'd be sweeping the valley floor any minute. She didn't wait long. 10 minutes later, the low chop of rotor blades hummed across the ridgeline, and sunlight glanced off the canopy of an incoming NATO Blackhawk. Avery Holt stood at the edge of the clearing, one hand gripping the rope that bound Major Drax's wrists, the other holding a field tablet she'd pulled from his tent, stuffed with falsified route logs, ghost manifests, and evidence of coordination between the mercenaries and a NATO logistics officer. Her body screamed from every wound. Her shoulder pulsed with pain. Her face streaked in dried blood. But she stood tall. 2 soldiers dropped from the Blackhawk's side doors before the skids even touched dirt. Helmets low, rifles raised, eyes scanning. "Lieutenant Commander Holt," one of them called, his tone wavering. She gave a single nod and stepped forward, dragging Drax like dead weight. "Alive and uncooperative," she said flatly. "Tag him before he talks his way out of treason." The NATO men exchanged looks. They hadn't been briefed, not really. Probably told this was a training mishap or an equipment loss, the usual cover story when things went wrong. Avery tossed the tablet to one of them. "That's the truth." He scrolled through the files. His eyes widened. Maps, codes, convoy routes marked for interception instead of protection. Even a spreadsheet listing black market payouts in euros. A younger officer stepped off the ramp, barely 25. His face pale as he looked from her to the cliff, then to the smoking ruins behind her. "We thought you fell," he said quietly. Avery's expression didn't change. "Seals don't fall," she replied. "We climb." The words hung in the air, carried by the thrum of the rotors. Then she turned toward the chopper, leaving Drax in the dust. He groaned once as soldiers cuffed him properly, one muttering a curse under his breath. Avery never looked back. She didn't need to. She'd already won. The Black Hawk rose slow into the pale sky, rotors scattering ash and pine needles like shattered metals. Avery sat near the open bay door, legs heavy, hands wrapped in gauze. The medic had insisted on dressing her palms and shoulder before takeoff. She hadn't argued. Her silence said everything. Below, the ridge curled away into mist and treetops, the same ridge they'd thrown her from, the same one she'd climbed with broken ribs and bare hands. She stared at it, not with anger or pride, but with something colder. Recognition. That was where they tried to end her, and where she chose to rise. Beside her, Drax slumped in restraints, mouth taped, wrists bound behind him. His eyes flicked toward her once, searching for something. Pity, mercy, anything. He found none. Pity, fear, bargaining. Major Drax searched for any trace of them in her face, and found nothing. Avery Holt didn't even glance his way. Her eyes stayed fixed on the horizon. In the cargo bay behind her, 4 sealed crates were strapped down. Evidence, the medic had called them. But Avery knew better. They weren't just evidence. They were the reason her team would finally learn the truth. The reason this operation wouldn't vanish under paperwork. The reason she was still alive. The pilot's voice crackled through the cabin comms. "Base confirms receipt of your signal, Commander. You'll be debriefed upon landing. Hold tight." She didn't reply. She simply leaned back against the fuselage, closing her eyes for the first time since the fall. Words weren't necessary. Everything that mattered had already been spoken on that ridge, in blood, in stone, and in silence. Could you climb your way back when everyone believed you were done? And when betrayal comes not from the enemy, but from your own side, what would you do? Let us know in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story reminded you why Navy SEALs never truly fall, hit that like button, subscribe to Major Tom's Tales, and tap the bell so you never miss what happens when the odds turn upside down. And if you know someone who needs to remember, SEALs don't quit. They climb. Your next mission's already waiting on the screen. Go watch it now. And I'll see you tomorrow. Same time, same channel. Major Tom's Tales.